The committee has previously discussed the lack of oversight of massive funds flows originating in the Middle East. It has studied the interconnectedness of global financial centers. It has explored the threats posed by banking secrecy rules in Switzerland, the Caribbean, and emerging financial centers of the Far East. It has argued the trade-offs between maintaining privacy and disclosing threats to international security. We are here today to learn whether the U.S. financial authorities have the tools, staffing, and the will to successfully perform our nation's portion of this task, to discover whether foreign governments and international financial institutions are similarly focused and effective, and to understand whether this information is being shared and effectively used to arrest and imprison drug kingpins, foil al-Qaeda and other international terrorist groups, enforce trade sanctions, and identify global criminal activity.
Thank you, Chairman Moore. Ranking Member Bigot.
There you go.
And the distinguished members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today regarding one of the largest abuses ever of the United States banking system. The fraud and money laundering scheme that I'd like to discuss involves the transfer of approximately $1 trillion through the United States financial system, all directed by a single Saudi national named Man al-Sana, using a Saudi Arabian's remittance company, or Hawala, called the Money Exchange, as well as two banks he controlled in Bahrain and other companies in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The fraud appears to have deprived its victims of more than $20 billion, making it larger than the Madoff fraud in actual out-of-pocket loss. Yet there were no questions asked, not by banks, not by regulators, not by prosecutors, until the whole scheme collapsed. The Money Exchange's main U.S. dollar account was with an American bank in New York. Now, the Money Exchange was a small company with a transactional volume for its remittance companies of around $60 million per year in total. Nevertheless, it approached a major U.S. bank that visited it in the Middle East and said it would like to open a correspondent account in New York in order to transfer approximately $15 billion in payments annually. At least 4 huge red flags present themselves right at the outset, which is the key point at which banks can make determinations about the bona fides of their customers. First, you have a high-risk region and country, the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. Second, a business that accepts money transfers for walk-in customers with whom it has no account relationship and does none of the necessary due diligence. Third, you have a massive transactional volume, $15 billion a year. And fourth, you have a volume of transactions which is entirely disproportionate to the customer's ostensible business. Now, one would expect a searching interrogation of this customer. That's what the Know Your Customer rules require. There should be a careful evaluation of the intended use of the account, the source, destination, and business purpose of the funds flowing through. And because the prospective customer is itself a financial institution, there must be a thorough investigation of that institution's anti-money laundering and know your customer policies. Yet our investigation has revealed no evidence of any significant due diligence or anti-money laundering investigation of the Money Exchange in Saudi Arabia. The two Bahraini banks, Awal Bank and the International Banking Corporation, had no legitimate customers. They were created and used by Mr. Al-Sana to borrow money and then funnel it through the U.S. financial system to dummy customers and then to his own companies. So if the core is to know your customers' customers, here you had two large banks that had no customers. Now, U.S. anti-money laundering and anti-terror finance policy is a two-part defense. There must be pre-event diligence by the banks and backed by regulatory oversight, and post-event law enforcement, where the initial diligence has failed to detect or prevent money laundering. Banks are the critical first lines of defense, supported by clear regulation. But banks often have incentives to look the other way, and fines for noncompliance are still viewed as relatively unlikely to occur and a cost of doing business if they do. This must change if the system is to work effectively. Our regulatory regime also needs to make clear that if banks agree to open dollar accounts for customers, it doesn't matter if the relationship is based elsewhere. That customer must be subject to all of the scrutiny and rigor applied to someone who walks off the street in Midtown Manhattan to open a bank account. Now, we are not aware of any investigations ongoing by the relevant regulator into this massive systemic failure. We understand that Congressman Peter King has written to the Attorney General to request an investigation, but we've received no requests for information to date from the Justice Department. The United States alone possesses the resources and the tools to protect the global financial system from international financial crime, money laundering, and terror finance. And the United States has an overwhelming national security interest in taking the lead. We cannot delegate this critical responsibility to others. This fraud involved more than a dozen countries. Each of them had only a piece of it. Each can claim that they can only investigate and see a slice. Each can claim some other country has a greater responsibility. But in an age when international fraudsters and money launderers can cross borders with the click of a mouse, the response cannot be, it's not our responsibility. That's a recipe for disaster. Banks must diligently inquire into their customers and their customers' customers. Wrongdoers must be investigated, charged, extradited, prosecuted. The U.S. must lead, but cooperation must be sought. Saudi Arabia, for example, is a committed ally in the fight against terror finance, and I have no doubt that if the U.S. underlined the importance of getting to the bottom of this or other massive money laundering schemes that originate there, the Saudis would cooperate. Extensive legislation is not needed. The need is for strong oversight and firm priorities, together with clearly defined responsibilities and accountability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In 2005, we set up FinCEN, as Mr. Lynch was commenting earlier, to do precisely this with respect to following the money involving terrorism. Listening to the testimony of all of our witnesses, it's pretty clear to me that FinCEN has not accomplished the task. And I would like to ask you, having studied the issue, where is the deficiency at FinCEN? Is it access to information? Is it analytic capability and focus? Is it the interface with law enforcement or foreign cooperation? Where is the shortfall, and what needs to be done to fix FinCEN so it can perform this critically important international role?
Thank you, Congressman Minnick. FinCEN has probably been under-resourced, and I think there's a real confusion as to whose job is what. I think there's slippage at every stage of the matter. For example, when banks do their due diligence, there's an element of out of sight, out of mind. And when a Middle Eastern business wants to open an account in a New York bank, they're not going to have the level of communication and information that they would get if it were a New York business. And that has to stop. So there needs to be an interface between the compliance people and the business people at the bank to begin with, so that good information is coming into the United States whenever a Middle Eastern or someone from any politically risky area of the world wants to open an account. And they need to get that qualitative information. They also need to have better filters so that when a business comes in, as in our case, and said, we're going to do $15 billion of transactions, somebody there finds out why, and that's documented. And if the story doesn't add up, that information then goes to the regulators. And when that $15 billion in transactions grows to 30 and 35 billion, there also needs to be a red flag that goes up within the bank and within the regulator. So there is a problem of being inundated with money, but with information, but there needs to be a kind of qualitative regulation so that there's a dialogue between the regulators and the banks and FinCEN so everyone knows what they are looking for. I think Mr. Caruso's idea of avoiding that sea of information that is likely to yield very little should be reconstituted so there is better qualitative dialogue between the bank regulators who are looking to the financial safety and soundness and FinCEN, which is really looking to the national security interest. And I think everyone is stovepiped at the moment.
Thank you. And finally, where did that $1 trillion go?
Well, we don't know, and that's the big problem, because even if we could account for 99% of it, there's so much money unaccounted for, and that poses real danger to our system and to the national security interest of this country.